Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at something pretty profound, I think. The idea of suffering and its potential role in, spiritual growth.
Okay.
You sent in some really interesting excerpts from Texto Pagado by BtalityLife,
Right.
and it's in Spanish, which I think adds kind of
It does.
a whole other layer to it. So we're going to
Yeah.
unpack those ideas, and we're going to touch on how they connect to Hermetic principles. And then we're even going to bring in something kind of unexpected, a dream that Bertrand Russell had about God. So
Yeah.
buckle up. This is going to be...
That's quite the collection
No.
of thought-provoking sources you've got there. Yeah, it's interesting. Suffering, we tend to look at that as something to avoid at all costs.
Right.
Or something that we just have to endure.
Right.
But these excerpts you've got here suggest that it might actually be a necessary component of our spiritual development.
Yeah, and Texto Pagado really hits hard on this idea that, suffering is not some kind of divine punishment, but a catalyst. A catalyst for spiritual awakening. Like you're jolted out of complacency.
Right.
And forced to seek a deeper meaning.
Yeah.
You ever felt like that? Like going through a really tough time made you kind of reassess what's really important.
Absolutely. And, this is where Hermetic principles can add another dimension to this whole discussion, and particularly the principle of vibration.
Right.
The idea that everything in the universe is energy in motion, vibrating at different frequencies. And suffering might seem like a low vibration, but it has the potential for transformation. It holds the potential for transformation.
I love that analogy of coal being transformed into diamond.
Right.
Under immense pressure.
Right.
The coal representing suffering, and the diamond representing this higher state of consciousness. But it's not just about passively waiting for the pressure to transform us.
Right. Right. It's about actively engaging with the experience, learning from it, allowing ourselves to be refined by it.
Okay.
So think of somebody who experiences a major setback in their career.
Sure.
Devastating.
Right.
But they use that experience to reassess their path.
Right.
Learn new skills, and ultimately find a career that's even more fulfilling.
Right.
That's active transformation.
And Texto Pagado
Yeah.
also brings up this idea, this kind of fascinating idea that we're most aware of our spiritual needs when we're in pain.
Okay.
Almost like a fog lifting during difficult times.
Yeah.
And it even uses a really powerful quote to illustrate this point. And I'm going to read this quote because it is pretty profound. This is the reason why when life flows in harmony, religion and spirituality often seem to fade from our attention. It is in moments of pain, when suffering envelops us, that we look up and seek answers beyond the material plane. In the midst of the storm, the soul turns to God, and our words become pleas, because suffering shakes us and reminds us of our true divine essence. It is there that consciousness sharpens and the question arises, who am I?
Wow. Yeah, that really speaks to how suffering can push us to seek answers beyond the surface level of our daily lives.
Right.
It forces us to confront those big existential questions.
Right.
Who am I? What is my purpose?
Right.
What truly matters?
It's so interesting how Texto Pagado connects this idea to Jesus' teachings.
Yeah.
And finds these parallels with Hermetic principles.
Right.
And it even points out how, Jesus himself recognized the transformative potential of suffering.
Absolutely. And we see that in a lot of his teachings.
Yeah.
For example, when he says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." This suggests that pain can lead to a deeper understanding and ultimately solace.
And looking at it through the lens of Hermeticism, this really aligns perfectly with the principle of polarity. You can't truly know joy without experiencing sorrow or light without darkness.
One defines the other.
Think about it. Don't those moments of joy feel even sweeter after you've gone through a really tough time?
Absolutely. And, suffering gives us a point of reference, contrast that allows us to fully appreciate the good times.
Right.
Plus, it builds resilience. Those who haven't faced hardship, they might crumble under pressure.
Right.
But those who have gone through the fire, they often emerge stronger, more capable.
Now, for that unexpected twist that I mentioned earlier, you also sent in an account of a dream that Bertrand Russell had about God.
Okay.
Now, it might seem like a leap, but I think it connects to our discussion in a surprising way.
I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
Okay. So Russell, a known atheist, dreamt of this frail, neglected God.
Yeah.
And he interpreted it as humanity forgetting its spiritual roots.
Interesting.
And that's where I see the link to Texto Pagado.
Oh, okay.
Because the text mentions the logos,
Right.
which refers to universal order and reason
Right.
connecting us all.
Yeah.
Could Russell's forgotten God represent a disconnect from that logos? Could we be neglecting our spiritual side in the pursuit of worldly things?
That's a very thought-provoking question, and it leads us to another concept that Texto Pagado explores, samsara.
Yes.
Right.
Samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth in Hinduism.
Right.
And the text links this to the idea that repeating the same mistakes, making the same mistakes over and over, is a sign of stagnant spiritual growth.
Think of samsara as a hamster wheel. We get stuck in these patterns of behavior because of unlearned lessons. We repeat the same mistakes, experience the same suffering, until we finally wake up and break the cycle.
Have you ever felt like you're stuck in a loop?
Oh, yeah.
Repeating the same patterns in relationships, at work.
Absolutely. It's like, here we go again.
Right, here we go again.
Yeah.
But how does this connect to suffering being an alchemical fire, which is another big idea in Texto Pagado?
Well, if samsara is the cycle that we're trying to break free from, then the alchemical fire of suffering is what refines us.
Okay.
Burns away the impurities and ultimately helps us escape that loop. It's painful,
Right.
but it's also incredibly transformative.
So just as intense heat is needed to forge metal, suffering can forge spiritual resilience and clarity.
Exactly.
But Texto Pagado also warns against seeking constant comfort and safety.
Right.
Right. It suggests that true spiritual growth often requires taking risks and facing uncertainty.
Stepping outside your comfort zone.
Remember that line, whoever wants to save their life will lose it.
Powerful stuff.
Yeah. It's a powerful reminder that clinging to comfort and security can actually hinder our spiritual progress.
Absolutely. It's about having the courage to step into the unknown,
Right.
to face our fears, to embrace the challenges that life throws our way. It's in those moments of discomfort and uncertainty that we often discover our greatest strength and resilience.
This reminds me of that hamster wheel of samsara. If we keep trying to avoid suffering,
Right.
we just get stuck in those repetitive cycles,
Right.
never truly learning the lessons we need to learn.
Exactly. Suffering can be a wake-up call, a sign that we're stuck in a pattern
Right.
that's no longer serving us. It's an invitation to step off that hamster wheel of samsara and onto a path of true spiritual growth.
This is all incredibly thought-provoking.
It is.
But it also sounds really challenging.
It is.
So how do we actually embrace suffering in a way that leads to transformation
Yeah.
rather than just more pain?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
And that's something we'll delve into in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore specific tools and techniques for embracing suffering and harnessing its power for growth.
I can't wait. This whole conversation is turning out to be quite the alchemical process in itself, wouldn't you say?
It really is.
All right, we'll be back in just a moment.
Welcome back, everybody. We covered so much ground already, from suffering being a catalyst for change to Bertrand Russell's Forgotten God and the concept of samsara. It's incredible how all these different ideas are starting to weave together, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's like we're piecing together this complex puzzle.
Right.
And remember that intriguing idea from Texto Pagado about suffering being like an alchemical fire?
Right.
I'd love to kind of delve a little deeper into that.
Okay.
The text suggests that suffering can actually refine us, purify us, even transform us into something more resilient.
Yeah. It's such a powerful metaphor, isn't it?
It is. Alchemy, at its core, is about transformation, taking something raw and unrefined, and through this intense heat and pressure, transforming it into something much more valuable, much more potent.
Think of a blacksmith hammering away at a piece of iron.
Right.
Heating it until it's glowing red, shaping it into a tool or a weapon.
Right.
That intense heat and pressure is essential to the process.
So Texto Pagado is suggesting that suffering can act as that alchemical fire for the human soul, burning away our impurities, our attachments, those ego-driven desires, and revealing our true potential underneath it all.
When we're comfortable, when life is smooth sailing, it's easy to become complacent.
Yeah.
We might not even be aware of our own limitations or the areas where we need to grow. But when we encounter suffering, when life throws us a curveball, we're forced to confront those shadow aspects of ourselves.
It's like that saying, smooth seas don't make skillful sailors.
Exactly.
But it's not just about enduring hardship, is it? There's a conscious element to this transformation.
Right, exactly. Suffering can shatter our illusions, break down those walls we build around ourselves, and force us to confront our deepest fears and insecurities. It can be a painful process, absolutely, but it's also incredibly transformative.
Yeah.
Think about somebody who goes through a major health scare.
Right.
Suddenly, all those petty worries that consumed them before
Right.
seem insignificant.
Right.
They reevaluate their priorities, they focus on what truly matters, and they embrace life with this renewed sense of gratitude.
So it's like that intense heat of a furnace melting away the dross, leaving behind only the pure, refined metal.
Yeah.
That refined metal, in this case, representing our true self, our spiritual essence, emerging stronger and more resilient after going through the fire of suffering.
A great analogy. But how does this actually happen?
Yeah.
How does suffering, something we generally see as negative, undesirable,
Right.
actually lead to spiritual growth?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
And that's where those hermetic principles we talked about earlier come in.
Okay.
Remember the principle of mentalism,
Yes.
which states the all is mind, the universe is mental.
Right.
It's the idea that everything we experience both internally and externally is a product of our thoughts and beliefs.
So if we apply this principle to the concept of suffering, are you saying that it's not the external event itself that causes us pain,
Yeah?
but our interpretation of it? Our thoughts, our beliefs, our reactions to the event shape our experience of suffering.
Precisely.
Okay.
Two people could experience the same event,
Right.
but one might suffer immensely,
Right.
while the other remains relatively unscathed. It all boils down to their perception of the event.
Okay.
And this is where that alchemical transformation can begin. By becoming aware of our thoughts and beliefs, by examining our reactions to suffering,
Right.
we can begin to shift our perspective.
So instead of seeing suffering as something that's happening to us,
Yeah.
we can start to see it as an opportunity for growth and change.
Exactly.
Easier said than done, though.
Of course, it takes effort
Yeah.
and a willingness to look inward. But this shift in perception is
Right.
what allows that alchemical fire to do its work. It's like consciously choosing to enter the furnace, to allow the heat and pressure to transform us.
Right.
And remember how Texto Pagano talks about how in the midst of suffering, we often turn to God or a higher power.
Right.
I think that's a part of this process too.
You're right. When we're going through those tough times,
Yeah.
it's natural to seek comfort, guidance, support.
Right.
And often that search leads us to something beyond ourselves.
It can be a catalyst for spiritual awakening,
Yeah.
cracking open the shell of our ego and
Yeah.
allowing us to glimpse the vastness of our true nature, our connection to something larger than ourselves.
Right.
Think about those moments when you felt the sense of awe or wonder,
Sure.
maybe in nature or through art. Suffering can sometimes lead us to those same feelings of connection and transcendence.
It can. But Texto Pagano also talks about the importance of not avoiding suffering, even suggesting that true spiritual growth often requires taking risks and facing uncertainty. Remember that line, whoever wants to save your life will lose it. It's a powerful reminder that clinging to comfort and security can hinder our spiritual progress.
It's about having the courage to step into the unknown, to face our fears, to embrace the challenges that life throws our way.
Right.
It's in those moments of discomfort and uncertainty that we often discover our greatest strength and resilience.
That reminds me of that hamster wheel of samsara we were talking about earlier. If we keep trying to avoid suffering,
Yeah.
we just get stuck in those repetitive cycles,
Right.
never truly learning the lessons that we need to learn.
That's a great connection. Suffering can be a wake-up call, a sign that we're stuck in a pattern that's no longer serving us. It's an invitation to step off that hamster wheel of samsara and onto a path of true spiritual growth.
This is all incredibly thought-provoking,
It is.
but it also sounds really challenging. How do we actually embrace suffering
Right.
in a way that leads to transformation
Yeah.
rather than just more pain?
That's a question a lot of people grapple with, and it's something we'll explore further in the last part of our deep dive. We'll look at practical tools and techniques for navigating the alchemical fire of suffering and emerging transformed.
I'm eager to dive into that. This whole conversation is turning out to be quite the alchemical process in itself.
It really is.
Welcome back to our deep dive into suffering and spiritual transformation. We explored some really profound ideas, from suffering as an alchemical fire to the hermetic principles that underpin this whole transformational process.
It has been a fascinating journey so far, hasn't it? But we left off with a pretty big question.
Well, we did. We were talking about how to actually embrace suffering in a way that leads to growth rather than just more pain. Texto Pagano offers some intriguing insights, But I'll admit, it's all still a bit abstract for me.
I get it. It's one thing to understand these concepts intellectually, but it's another thing entirely to actually embody them in our lives.
Right.
So let's explore some practical ways we can navigate suffering and harness its transformative power. Because, let's be real, suffering is a part of life. We can't avoid it completely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But we can learn to approach it with a fresh perspective,
Yeah.
one that sees suffering not as an enemy to be feared, but as a teacher to be learned from.
Hmm.
So what's the first step?
Awareness. We've touched on this before, but it's key. It's not the external event itself that causes our suffering, but our thoughts and beliefs about it. So the first step is to cultivate awareness of those thoughts and beliefs.
So when we're going through a tough time, we need to pay attention to that inner dialogue.
Yeah.
What are we telling ourselves about the situation? What are our fears? What are our anxieties? Are we catastrophizing?
Yes. And that can be tough because our natural instinct is often to avoid those uncomfortable feelings. We distract ourselves, we numb ourselves, anything to not feel the pain.
Yeah. So how do we overcome that resistance?
Yeah.
How do we sit with the discomfort?
Mindfulness practices like meditation can be incredibly helpful here.
Okay.
Meditation helps us develop the ability to observe our thoughts and emotions without judgment. It creates some space between ourselves and our reactions.
So instead of being swept away by the current of our emotions, we can learn to pause, observe, and then choose a more skillful response.
Exactly. And that ability to choose our response is so important because when we react impulsively from a place of fear or anger, we often just perpetuate the cycle of suffering.
Right. So awareness helps us break free from that cycle. It allows us to step back and see things more clearly. But what comes next?
Acceptance. Once we become aware of our thoughts and emotions, the next step is to accept them.
Okay.
And I don't mean resignation or giving up. I mean acknowledging the reality of what we're experiencing without resistance.
Okay, I'm going to be honest, that sounds a lot easier said than done. How do we accept something that feels so painful, so unwanted?
It starts with compassion, specifically self-compassion. Instead of beating ourselves up for feeling what we're feeling, we can offer ourselves kindness and understanding.
So it's like saying to ourselves, it's okay to feel this way. It's human to experience pain and suffering. I'm not weak for struggling with this.
Exactly. And that act of self-compassion can be incredibly healing. It allows us to soften that resistance, to create space for healing and transformation. Remember how Textor Pagano talks about suffering helping us connect with something larger than ourselves? I think that's a part of this acceptance process, too.
I see what you mean. When we surrender to what is, when we stop fighting against the reality of our experience, it can open us up to a deeper sense of connection.
It's like we're letting go of our ego's need for control
Right.
and surrendering to a higher power, to the flow of life itself.
Yeah.
And that surrender, that trust in something beyond ourselves can be a source of immense strength and comfort during those really challenging times.
So we've talked about awareness and acceptance. What's the final step in this process of embracing suffering?
Transformation. Once we've cultivated awareness and acceptance, we can start to see suffering not as a punishment, but as an opportunity for growth. We can take that alchemical fire and use it to refine ourselves to become stronger and more resilient.
And that transformation can take many forms, right?
Absolutely. It might involve developing new coping skills, changing our perspective on a situation, or even discovering a newfound sense of purpose and meaning. Think about somebody who loses a loved one.
Right.
It's a devastating experience, but they might channel that grief into helping others who are grieving, or they might find a new appreciation for the preciousness of life. The pain is still there, but it's transformed into something meaningful.
So even though the experience of suffering is undeniably painful, it can ultimately lead to something positive, something that enriches our lives and helps us grow spiritually.
That's the beauty of it. And the process is ongoing. Each time we encounter suffering, we have a new opportunity to practice these principles, to refine our understanding, and to deepen our connection to ourselves and to something larger than ourselves.
You know, Texto Pagano mentions this idea that the truth will set you free. But it seems like the path to truth often requires going through periods of discomfort, even suffering.
That's a profound insight, and I think it ties back to that alchemical process we've been discussing. The truth, our true nature, can be hidden beneath layers of conditioning, fear, and illusion. And it's often through the fire of suffering that those layers are burned away, revealing the radiant truth within.
Wow, that's a powerful image. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you'd like our listeners to remember?
Suffering is an inevitable part of being human, but it doesn't have to define us. By cultivating awareness, practicing acceptance, and embracing the transformative potential of suffering, we can turn our pain into a catalyst for growth, resilience, and spiritual awakening. It's a journey, not a destination.
Thank you so much for guiding us through this incredible exploration of suffering and its role in our spiritual journey. It's been a truly enlightening experience. And to our listeners, we encourage you to continue your own deep dive into this profound and multifaceted topic. Embrace the challenges, lean into the discomfort, and trust that even in the darkest of times, there is always the potential for growth, healing, and transformation.